Uh, Good morning, Bernard and Lebo.
Morning. Hello. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to see you over vast distances.
Yeah, so it's so wonderful that we are again together to learn about these visual methods for change.
Yeah,
We
we're looking forward to the workshop.
Yeah. The participants are joining. We'll be able to start soon, I understand.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, Bernard and Lebo and others.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi.
Everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lungi. Astrid.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you here.
Cool. Hi, everybody.
Naveen, how many participants are we expecting? Hello, I understand it's already 2:05, but we'll wait for some time more, maybe a few minutes before we start. We understand a few participants are joining.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I understand we should start the session now. It's already 10 past 2 p.m. in India. So to begin with, I would like to welcome our resource persons as well as all participants who have logged in. And it's my pleasure today to introduce the lead resource persons for today's session, Bernard Gide, and I'll not be able to pronounce it properly, so let me call it Lebo. So these two lead facilitators. So Bernard is associate professor and head of department of family medicine at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He worked in rural hospital settings for well over a decade prior to joining the university, and he works with traditional healers, home-based carers, and community structures. He has a broad interest in medical humanities, including healthcare systems, health professional education in peripheral sites, community level care, and medical anthropology. And you would be all our participants, they belong to India, and you would be excited to know that Bernard loves India. He has visited us last year, I think. And we had a few excellent interactive sessions with Bernard and Lebo after that. And then the next, I would like to introduce to you Lebo. So Lebo is professor and the Dale Chair in Rural Education in the School of Education and Pro-Vice Chancellor, Social Cohesion at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Her research and teachings are in rural education, gender and education, sexual and reproductive health, and rights education, and girlhood studies. Methodologically, she is interested in the use of various participatory visual methods in research and development efforts in rural communities. And we had the pleasure of listening to Lebo earlier, and I understand all participants are going to enjoy listening to them. And they will be supported by 4 more resource persons, Lisa, Lunjail, Andrew, and Astrid, and I would request Bernard and Lebo to introduce them. Welcome, Bernard and Lebo and the whole team. And now I hand it over to Bernard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. It's wonderful to see you and to see quite a few other colleagues that we met last year. I can't believe that's already more than a year ago that I visited with you. I'd like to request our team to introduce themselves. Maybe Lisa, if you could go next.
Bernard. My name is Lisa Liebezig, and I work with Lebo and the rest of the team at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm the research manager at the Center for Visual Methodologies for Social Change.
Thank you very much. Lungi, could you go next?
Yes, thanks, Bernard. Lungile Masinga. I work with Lebo, Bernard, Lisa, and the team in the project curriculum, the hidden curriculum, but I'm also a senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Thank you very much. Astrid, could you go next? I'm going according to who's on my screen.
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Astrid Fefrigoti, and I'm also part of the team at UKZN, University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I'm a researcher there, and I specialize in using participatory visual methods and looking at ethical issues that need to be considered and how these methods can be used to engage with vulnerable populations and in health research. And I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
That's good. And then the last person on the team is Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Morning to us and afternoon for you. So I'm Andrew Ross. I work in the Family Medicine Department with Bernard and be part of the team looking at visual methods and hidden curriculum for undergraduate medical students. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you very much for that. I think what I'd like to do is give a little bit of an outline of what we are planning to do, and then I'll hand over to Lebo. What we were planning to do is that in the first roughly hour, we would like to give some background to visual methodologies, participatory visual methodologies, both looking at some of the theory, how it has been used, its ethical issues, kind of a range of things. And then in the second hour, we would like to break away into smaller teams. I hope you've all managed to have a picture ready. If you don't, we have got a few plans of how we can get around that. But we'll basically break into smaller groups where we want to explore the method, the process of doing this kind of research a little bit. And then we'll come back to the main group and have a broader discussion. So that's roughly what we've planned. I'm not sure whether the chat box, the chat stream is open for everyone, but kind of maybe if you do want to post questions or chats in the chat in the meantime, you're very welcome to. We'll try and respond to those as we go along. And and with that, I'd like to hand over to Lebo.
I would just like to confirm that the chat box is open for everyone, so all participants may post their questions and comments in between the session.
I'm asking Lisa to share our screen, our PowerPoint.
Lungi is going to do that for us today because I'm having some technology challenges today.
Okay. I think I might need permission because it's not allowing me to share.
Naveen and Mudita, please make Lungi a co-host.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I've made it presenter.
Disappeared.
I think now you'll be able to share it.
Okay. Please try again. It's not allowing me still.
Correct, ma'am.
Ma'am, please try now.
It comes on and off. Now it's on. Let me try.
Got you. Yeah, thank you. Hello to everybody, and It's nice to reconnect with the people we connected with. Last time I was talking to people in India. And apologies if this is going to be boring for you, but we want to do first an overview of participatory research, within which participatory visual methods are located. And then we will do a very brief overview of participatory visual methods, and then end that with an example of a participatory visual method, Photovoice, which many people are familiar with. But just to talk amongst ourselves how we might use that in health research, in community research, in educational research, and other areas of research. Next slide, Lungi. Yes, so I'm sure you're familiar with the learning theories of Kurt Lewin and Paulo Freire in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So participatory research has its origins in that kind of work, where the researchers had the aim of engaging very meaningfully with the people concerned. Theoretically, it draws on social constructionism, where learning, where knowledge is socially constructed with among the participants or with the participants. It seeks to, so participatory research seeks to undo the old situation where scientific knowledge is only understood by the elite, by the educated, and where Foucault had said that scientific knowledge often has very little relevance in people's everyday lives. So participatory research aims to make research and knowledge generation and knowledge itself relevant to the to people's everyday life. It is also located then within critical theory, which seeks to change the lives of people. So looking at research as social change, the process of research itself as an intervention to change people's lives, or at least to significantly push towards social change, and thereby involving marginalized groups or the groups that are being researched in the core construction of knowledge, rather than with knowledge about or on them. So the research itself involving action to address social problems in institutions or in communities. Next slide, please. So continuing on, participatory research obviously will involve meaningful collaboration with participants, and we will illustrate how in the next hour of this workshop. It assumes that the people in the communities where you are doing research are experts in their own lives, and they understand their situation well, and therefore you involve them in analyzing their situation and in coming up with solutions to whatever problem we're dealing with. Participatory research also seeks to democratize the research process, so to flatten the hierarchy that often characterizes research processes, where the researcher is the expert and the community members are lower down, being informed by. So it flattens that hierarchy and seeks to make the research process more democratic, more equitable. Next, please. Yeah, so as I said, it involves local people as co-researchers, and we often refer to them as co-researcher participants because they are participating in your research, but they are also co-constructing the knowledge together with you. I've already said it minimizes the power differences. It is also subjective, but also reflexive, in that it assists the researcher and the co-researcher participant in not only generating knowledge, but in reflecting on the research process, but also on the knowledge itself. So in essence, it is research with the participants than research on the people or about the people. Next, Lungi. So just an overview of some of the assumptions of participatory research. We assume that the problem, any research problem that we identify, the people who experience that problem are in the best position to conduct research or to make meaning of that problem. The second assumption I would like to highlight is that to improve the lives of people in marginalized communities, we must enlist research paradigm that allows them to understand the situation, that allows them to identify alternatives to whatever they're experiencing. I won't go through every bullet point, but the third one that I would like to highlight is that as the researcher then in that kind of research, the researcher is a facilitator and a co-producer of knowledge. So always keeping in mind that the participants are co-researchers and co-producers of knowledge in the situation. And lastly, what I would like to highlight is that the kind of research that we are talking about is never what is often referred to as a helicopter kind of research, where you fly into the community, spend a few hours and fly out. So it requires long-term engagement with the setting and with the participant in order to go through all the processes, cycles, and so on. So long-term engagement is very key in participatory research. Next slide, Lungi. So just maybe a word on the evolution or how we got to visual methodologies. Those of us who are old enough will remember that in the 70s and 80s, there were huge debates about the hierarchy between quantitative research and qualitative research. Those debates ended up in what was referred to as a linguistic turn, where the research community accepted that languages side by side with numbers are a legitimate tool for communicating research, for communicating language. Fast forward to the late 90s and the 2000s, there was a realization that actually in some communities, in many communities, numbers and languages are not always accessible to the local community, and there are other ways of communicating: the arts, the visuals, and so on. So the emergence of visual research was meant to address that, but also to address the aesthetic form of communicating research. And therefore, in the early 2000s, there was what was then referred to as a visual term, the sense that you could communicate your research, your knowledge, without using numbers and without using words, other forms of communication. Okay. Next, Lungi.
It seems to have frozen. It's not allowing me. Let me see if I exit and come back. Yeah, now. It's on.
Okay, so as we all know, the 21st century seems to have introduced new issues in our community, and 2020 and 2021 has illustrated that very well. So how do we understand issues of COVID-19? What methods do we use to understand the very complex and intersecting issues that COVID-19 has brought on to communities and institutions? So new issues requiring new methodologies and new ways of doing research and knowing. We also then want to explore how participatory methodologies and participatory visual methodologies can be transformative. How do they contribute towards changing people's lives and so on? And for me, how they help those who are often not allowed to speak, whose voices are not heard, to be heard. And as I said, if we rely only on numbers and words, that means only the educated and the elite are allowed to talk. But if we use other methods, then it provides a space where other voices, alternative voices, can be heard. So an example that we like to use is from a book by Jan Egeland, Broken Bodies, Broken Dreams, Violence Against Women Exposed. If you want to get hold of it, it's a very interesting and very relevant book in terms of the value of participatory methods. And the quote there is, if there are disasters across the world, what we usually see on TV screens, just a rough sketch of the humanitarian crisis, usually from the perspective of the journalists or of the researchers. And rarely do the cameras go beneath that. And if we were to hand the cameras to the people who are experiencing the disasters, we would get a very different perspective to what is happening in those communities. Lungi, the screen just went blank. Uh-oh. I think Lungi is having, could you send the PowerPoint to Bernard or to somebody else, Lisa?
Yes, I'll do that now.
Lungi, you may also send the PowerPoint to me, and I'll give it to the team who is hosting it from Sevagram. That might help.
Okay.
Do you have my my email ID?
No, if you could just
I'll
give
put
that
my
to me
email ID
quickly.
on the chat.
Yeah, in the meantime, if you have a question of clarification or you want to add a point about participatory methods or concerns about how you might, your own understanding, maybe we could do that in the meantime.
Thanks, Lebo. I just wanted to say that I sent the PowerPoint to Bernard.
Okay, thanks.
Hasn't arrived yet. As soon as it comes, I'll.
Anyway, I think that was my last slide on the broad area of participatory research. And I wanted to spend 1 or 2 slides more on participatory visual methods in particular, as soon as the PowerPoint is up.
Taking a bit of time to download.
Yeah. Apologies for that. Our internet system is not very good in South Africa, unfortunately. We get these blackouts.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, yes. Thanks, Bernard.
Yes, I can see it.
Down to participatory, yeah, that one. The previous one?
Yeah.
The previous one. Up, yeah, that one.
Okay.
The picture one. Next one. Yeah, that one. And so as an introduction, this particular picture we often use as an example of just what you can say by looking at one picture. The old saying that one picture is worth 1,000 words, to that effect. So as you know, South Africa has had over the years, and it has improved in the last decade or so, a very devastating AIDS pandemic. And so with a lot of deaths and a lot of funerals. So that picture was taken by a colleague through her kitchen window on a Saturday morning. On a Saturday morning in South Africa, that's when most funerals take place. And so she said she'd always look out on a Saturday morning and see these scenes across her kitchen window of loads of buses and lots of people congregating at the cemetery for various burials. And so we would spend a lot of time talking about that picture and what it means in the lives of people impacted by the AIDS pandemic and the funerals on Saturday, just using that one picture. Next slide, please. This one illustrates, and it's only very clear to South Africans who know the context, but it was our former Minister of Health who spent years denying the being an AIDS denialist and denying people access to antiretroviral drugs. And by the time she changed her mind, a lot of people had died. So you could tell that story and tell its impact just using this one picture. So this one picture tells a lot of stories and highlights the very devastating impact of her AIDS denialism. Next slide, Bernard. Okay, just going back over what participatory visual methods is all about. We said it is a research that is produced collectively. It is informed by social constructionism, so influence and it involves reflexivity. It looks at participants as co-producers of knowledge. It creates spaces for communities to engage meaningfully in research by democratizing the space. It allows for the people's voices to be heard. It allows them to be engaged in data generation and in data analysis, and we will illustrate how. So participatory methods and participatory visual methods are a tool for inquiry, so for research, but they are also a tool for representation, as you saw in the previous two slides. They are also a tool for taking action, and we will talk about how that happens. Next slide. Yeah. Just a few highlights from this slide. Participatory visual methods help us to shift the boundaries in research in several ways. The most important for me being that the research process itself can be an intervention, hence the term research as social change or research for social change. The visual data, for example, the photograph or the video or the drawing can become an intervention, as we will illustrate. So we can do a photo exhibition for the community. We can do a screening event where we screen the videos and so on and so on. So the visual data itself can become the intervention. The community members, the co-researcher participants can be part of not only generating the knowledge, but also the interpretive process. And in the small groups, we will illustrate how that happens. And lastly, that it allows policy making or the start of policy making at the community level. Next slide, Bernard. Yeah, so to summarize, participatory visual methods ask us to ask these questions: who is the expert? So obviously not only the researcher is the expert, but the community members are the experts in their own lives. So they are in the best position to generate knowledge about their own lives. Whose voices are heard or whose voices should be heard. New issues in communities or complex issues in communities require new ways of thinking and new ways of generating knowledge. The issue of language, often language is accessible to only a few people. How do we address the language barrier in communities where we do research? And lastly, just to highlight that the visual allows dialogue in communities where dialogue is often difficult to implement or difficult to realize. And we hope that throughout this workshop, we will demonstrate how. Most importantly, for those of us who work with young people, but also with older people, visual methods, participatory methods are fun. And the whole area of edutainment comes into being. So you can educate and entertain at the same time. And young people respond very favorably to methods that engage them at that level of thinking. I think, Lisa, you should be next now. Or maybe just lastly, but is it research? And when we later talk about dissemination and analysis, we will talk about what counts as research in participatory visual methodologies. Okay. We can skip that. We will come back to it later. Lisa, your turn.
Thanks, Lebu. So against that background now, we're going to focus on a particular method, Photovoice, and I hope that everybody received the email with the instructions and the prompt about the Photovoice activity we're going to do today. If not, we'll sort that out when we break up into groups. The reason that we are doing a practical Photovoice activity today is that as participatory visual researchers, we don't use any methods with our co-researcher participants that we haven't done ourselves, so that we can have a better understanding of our co-researcher participants' experiences with that method. So we're very much looking forward to experiencing that with you all. So Photovoice as a method, it's influenced strongly by Paulo Freire's work around critical pedagogy, as Lebu mentioned earlier. Freire used photographs with his participants to build an awareness of self in context that could then inform social change. So he had the people that he worked with work with photographs that sort of reflect their everyday social and political realities, and the realities that shape and impact and reflect their lives in their context. So Freire argued that by discussing the content of the images themselves, people can step back from being very immersed in their own lives. They can step back and engage more readily with the abstract. So they can engage more readily with the broader sort of relations that are taking place around those issues. So he argued that by engaging with the photographs in these ways, people could engage in a collective process of reflection, of introspection, and of discussion of the images that contribute towards a critical consciousness in general and or around a particular issue. So for Freire, it was a tool to use to engage with the people with whom he worked, to work towards this critical consciousness. Then Photovoice, as we know it now, largely builds on the work of Carolyn Wang. And Carolyn Wang used Photovoice with a very specific objective of using it as a tool for social change. So this idea of having developed a critical consciousness and then building on that to use it as a tool for social change. So Wang and Burris, with whom she then published the findings of her work in 1994 and 1997, argued that Photovoice is actually a means of collecting rich narrative data, but not just that. It sort of takes us beyond, as Lebo suggested before, it takes us beyond just discourse, just spoken language, and allows us to tap into kind of perception and experience and people's spatial and embodied ways of knowing their own world. So Wang and Burris suggest about Photovoice that it enables people to record and reflect community strengths and concerns or issues. It, through the process of Photovoice, promotes knowledge and critical dialogue about issues, and we'll see how that works a bit later, about issues, and allows people again to step back and sort of reflect on the impact of these issues on individuals and communities through the discussion of the images. So Photovoice involves producing the image itself, but perhaps even more importantly, discussing those images. And that second phase of discussing the image is hugely important. So the core components of Photovoice as a process then are this collaborative meaning making between the people, your co-researcher participants themselves, and between you as a researcher and your co-researcher participants. And using this collaborative meaning making for dissemination later for social change. And Lungi will talk about that later. So there is a clear, there is a clear social or policy change objective to take in these photographs. So in that way, Photovoice is a process and a product towards social change. Next slide, please, Bernard. So this is an example of, this example draws on Carolyn Wang's work. She, possibly the most well-known example of her work is that she used Photovoice to work with Chinese peasant women to explore the challenges that they experienced in their lives, and to use this process and the photographs as the product to explore ways to improve their lives, to identify the kinds of support that they needed and how to get that support, specifically for women who spent their days working in rice paddies. So the women that Wang worked with photographed danger areas and areas of challenge that they experienced. And then they selected from the photographs that they had taken, they selected those which best showed the problems, which best communicated the problems. And then these photographs were then facilitated by Carolyn Wang. These photographs were then shown to policymakers to sort of garner support for these women and improve their lives. Next slide, please, Bernard. So reflecting on this work, Wang concluded that images contribute to how we see ourselves and how we define our experiences, our lived experiences, and how we relate to the world, and what about our lives and our experiences we perceive as significant or different. And she argued that the lesson that an image teaches isn't in necessarily the physical image itself, but rather more importantly about how people interpret the image. She goes on to argue that images can influence our definition of the situation regarding the social, cultural, and economic conditions that affect women's health in this case. So it's the photograph itself is important, but the interpretation of the photograph is perhaps even more important than that. And as we define the challenges that communities face, this is a really key aspect of using this method, is that it can be used to articulate and define the research problem or the challenge faced by the co-researcher participants and communities in a way that reflects the lived experiences of our co-researcher participants. Next slide, please, Bernard. So, Photovoice is a research strategy. So it uses photographs. It puts cameras in the hands of our co-researcher participants. So we're seeing images from the perspective of our co-research participants rather than generating images of their lives ourselves. So it is a strategy and it is a process. So it gives people the opportunity to record their lives and the challenges they face, but also to reflect and critically engage with issues that they face in a creative way. And it can be used as a grassroots policy-making strategy. So using the photographs as tools for advocacy can start a grassroots policy-making process. Next slide, please, Bernard. So Photovoice is particularly useful for working with vulnerable or marginalized groups because it allows them to identify and articulate the challenges that they face in their lives from their own perspective. And it allows them to do that without necessarily having to verbally or use words to articulate this. And in this way, it can enable the voices of these groups who might otherwise find it difficult to respond in a conventional interview situation. They might feel uncomfortable doing so. It creates almost a gateway to a deeper discussion of the issues that are being raised and how to define the challenge that people face in general. So it also allows for a very real engagement with our co-researcher participants. And it's very important not to underestimate the importance of having fun with the people with whom we work. And through this process of taking the photographs and discussing them, it opens up a democratic space, which allows participants to have more power in the research relationship and allows them to feel confident in their own right to tell their own story. It's also very difficult to ignore issues when they're visually presented. So pictures can be very much in your face, and they, yes, sorry. Next slide, please, Bernard. So we've used some examples here of Photovoice posters that have been created by co-researcher participants in some of our projects. And this example, these are Photovoice posters. So our co-researcher participants have gone and taken their photographs, and they've created a caption, and they've stuck their photograph on a piece of paper and then written their caption next to their photograph. And the caption is sort of a very brief description of what's happening in the photograph, of the very basic meaning that the photographer means to convey through the image. So in this example, we were exploring how girls and young women in rural areas in South Africa, spaces and places in which they felt safe or unsafe. And then, you know, honing in on potential places for intervention based on these things to increase girls' safety and their sense of feeling safety. Next slide, please, Bernard. The second example is work that we did with first-year medical school students at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, students from rural origins, to explore the hidden curriculum in this particular example, feelings of belonging at the university or not belonging, and what challenges they face and what facilitates feelings of belonging. So again, these are Photovoice posters with the photograph taken by the co-researcher participant, and in this case, a slightly longer caption at the bottom of the photograph. Next slide, please, Bernard. Just another example of what a Photovoice poster might look like. And having looked at these three sets of images, notice that the photographs themselves are not literal depictions of something. They are metaphors, or they are symbolic of something, which you then discuss further later on in the process. Next slide, please, Bernard. So when using Photovoice in your own work with your own co-researcher participants, we've broken it down into 8 steps that you can follow. So the first step is to explain the process to your co-researcher participants, to orient them so they know in which direction the activity is going to go. The second step is to give a quick tutorial on using the equipment. So we'll return to a discussion of equipment later, but for our work, we've often used entry-level tablet computers, and especially in our work with young people, they often know more about the equipment than we do. Nevertheless, just in case, we give a quick tutorial on how to use the equipment. Probably the most important part of the tutorial would be discussing how to frame a photograph. So what you want in the foreground, what you want in the background, what you want to be the central focus of the photograph, trying to avoid photographing into the light, or maybe doing that on purpose, just discussing some technicalities around basic photography. And a very important part of this tutorial then, of the second step, is discussing visual ethics, which Astrid will talk about a little bit later. The third step is to introduce the prompt and give very good instructions to your co-researcher participants about how much time they have. So introduce and discuss the prompt, not too deeply, because you want people to respond almost immediately to the prompt. But ensure that all of your co-researcher participants understand it, basically. Then give them an idea of how much time they have to take the photograph, how many photographs they can take, and what might happen after the once they've taken the photographs. So you really just want to orient them in the process. Then distribute the equipment if that's what you are going to be doing, and send your co-researcher participants off to take their photographs. What happens then is that the co-research participants will return with their photographs, and either you will use a portable photograph printer, which is very cool, or you transfer the photographs onto a laptop, and using a program like PowerPoint, you can create a Photovoice poster on PowerPoint where you place the photograph on the slide and the caption below the photograph, or you print the photograph, stick it on a piece of paper, and handwrite the caption. What follows then is sort of like a mini exhibition. So you display the Photovoice posters in any way you can, really. You can stick them on a wall, or you can hang them from a piece of string. That can be quite effective and enjoyable for young people. And then this part of the exhibition allows all of the co-researcher participants to have a look at each person's Photovoice poster, and then familiarize themselves with each image and the captions. And this then allows you to move into the discussion phase, where you invite each participant to talk about their photograph, and then have the other co-researcher participants respond. And this kickstarts the discussion process, out of which you can identify some of the overarching themes. The final step in this process is to develop a curatorial statement. So as you may have seen in museums or in art galleries, a curatorial statement is basically a description of the display or the exhibition that allows the viewers to understand the context of the exhibition. Next slide, please, Bernard. So some guidance for when you facilitate a Photovoice activity with your co-researcher participants. Give some careful thought to what equipment you're going to use for the activity. It's not necessary to use high-tech photograph cameras or anything like that. The photographs themselves do not have to be particularly high quality, and the equipment that you use needs to be accessible to your co-researcher participants, not just in terms of having access to the actual equipment, but also in being comfortable using the equipment. So think about also whether you're going to give out the equipment to your co-researcher participants, or whether they are going to use their own equipment, cell phones or tablets. There are ethical issues related to participants using their own equipment. So give some thought to what equipment you're going to use. As I said before, we have often used entry-level tablet computers for our co-research participants to take their photographs. Be very clear with your participants from the beginning what you're planning to do with the photographs, and sometimes it's necessary to engage in a discussion about this. So let them know that you are going to be displaying them later and discussing them later if they consent to that. Let them know if you plan on using the photographs for a community exhibition to raise awareness about a particular issue that they may or may not choose to participate in. It's important that they know what the photographs are going to be used for and who might see them later on. Are you using the photographs for an internal discussion between yourselves and your co-researcher participants to better understand an issue, or are you going to use them later as tools for awareness raising and advocacy? So you need to discuss also, as part of this, the ethics requirements versus the participants' wishes. Our ethics committees are often very unwilling for us to use Photovoice posters and Photovoice photos in community exhibitions and things like that at the risk of revealing the identity of our co-researcher participants. On the other side, our co-researcher participants are often very keen to display and exhibit their photo voice work. They're very proud of it and would like to use it as tools for advocacy and awareness raising. So you need to discuss this and negotiate this as best you can in your context. And then during the activity, think quite carefully about the spaces available for your participants. So where are you meeting to have this workshop? How much time do you have available? If you are sending your participants out to take photographs in the areas surrounding the place where you're holding the workshop, are they going to be safe walking around with the equipment that they're using to take the photographs? Think about how far they might want to go to take the photographs in terms of coming back to the venue on time. So, for example, when we work with young people, we often ask them to stay very close to our workshop venue so that we can keep an eye on them and make sure that they are not being targeted for crime based on the equipment that they have, and to make sure that they don't wander off too far and then take 45 minutes to come back to the workshop venue, and by which time we really need to have moved on. So those are just some basic considerations for when you're doing photo voice yourselves. Next slide, please, Bernard. So once your co-research participants have taken the photographs and you've printed them and made posters, or you've created posters on PowerPoint, for example, you're going to start analyzing the photographs because they are, after all, data. Next slide, please, Bernard. So when we analyze photo voice, when we do an analysis of a photo voice activity, we need to sort of pay attention to the historical, the social, and the political background behind any form of expression, including photography. So the photographs, the images are not taken in isolation. So there are 3 layers of textual analysis that you engage with visual data. So the primary text, which is the photograph or the drawing, the production text, and this is made up of what your co-researcher participants say about their photographs. And then the secondary or audience text is made up of the audience responses. So that might be the rest of the co-researcher participants saying something about their about this person's photograph, or at a community exhibition, it might be that audience's response. We'll return to a discussion of sort of rigor in the analysis a little bit later. Next slide, please, Bernard. So in this process, there is a lot of data that counts as data that we can use to create meaning out of the chaos, so to speak. So you might record a brainstorming discussion about the challenges in a community, and audio record that. It includes audio recordings of participant brainstorming sessions, audio recordings of each photographer's explanation of their photograph, and an audio recording of the discussion of the audience, so the secondary text or audience text. And each of these audio recordings, each of these layers of audio recordings can be transcribed and then analyzed at a later stage. So the photograph itself is data, and then you have all of this audio recorded data. Next slide, please, Bernard. So there are different entry points to working with this visual data. So again, looking at what each participant says in the captions. You can analyze the shared discussions among the group. You can do a thematic analysis of the drawings or the photographs, and you can analyze the responses from the audiences at exhibitions. And to strengthen your analysis, you can use all of the above. Next slide, please. So there are phases to doing the data analysis of the photo voice activity. So you look at the photographs and the captions, you present them to the rest of the group. You can select and categorize the photos in terms of themes, and then you can create a visual display. And as the last step in the process during your workshop, you can reflect on the process, which we'll do a bit later. Next slide, please, Bernard. So the shared analysis of the photo voice is very important. The discussion that I mentioned before. So talking about the meaning embedded in the photograph, so interpreting the photograph, discussing that, and collaboratively making meaning. You can ask your co-researcher participants, tell me about your photographs. And also pay attention to the spatial organization of the photograph. You can have your participants take group or individual photographs, record both group and researcher generated themes, and audio record and transcribe as much as you can. Next slide, please. This is an example of a curatorial statement that you can develop following your discussion of the photo voice posters. It's a very useful sort of template that you can use for any photo voice activity or a number of other participatory visual methods. That is also another piece of data that can be analyzed. Next slide, please. I'll hand over to Lungi.
Thank you, Lisa. Now I guess we now get to a point where we're saying then, what do we do now with all this wonderful work that we have been doing? First, I need to apologize with my screen. I think my issues are with my network, so I think turning the video off helps a little bit to stabilize it. So going public, we want to kind of now share what is that we've been doing in that private space while we're working with our participants and producing all this work, and also having these wonderful conversations that are not only empowering the researcher, but also the one we saw, the so-called being researched, which in this context becomes like a co-researcher in a way. So the work that is produced is kind of co-owned, because both voices of the researcher and those who are being researched also like become dominant. So usually what we do then is that we move outside the spaces of the research space, where we now want to share with the community or in terms of what it is that we are saying. And we want to make sure that we share what is it that we are saying with the right kind of ears that needs to hear what it is that we are saying, especially when you're working within the kind of work that Lebo, Lisa, Astrid, and Bernard are working in, where it is about the people and it is about creating conversations and awareness. So it has to go to the public and be shared. Can I have the next slide, Bernard, please? So there are various ways to which you can do this. One of the ways, obviously, we usually do this to fulfill some kind of a commitment, maybe to the funders of, if it's a project where we go to things like seminar, we do create seminars, we go to conferences, and sometimes we use even public spaces where the right kind of people that we need to hear what it is that we're saying are located. And one of the things that we want to share with you is exhibitions is one of the things that we can do. Now, exhibitions come in different, not that they come in different way, but can be done in different spaces. So you can do an exhibition, for instance, in a conference where the pictures, which is what is wonderful about this kind of working and creating data and creating ways of conversations, is that you then create an exhibition where the images and the work that has been produced become the sole voice that is in that space, where you display what it is that you want to share, and it becomes like a public viewing space for people to come and look at what it is that you are saying. And in that context, then they then begin a new layer of conversation around the images that are being displayed. So you're not only now only just giving a voice, but you are allowing the images through exhibitions to actually do that for you. And new conversations and discussions emerges from that. And another way, like the picture that is on my right from the position that I'm sitting on, it's where you use a public space that has a lot of footwork. Now, what is the picture that you see there? It is a wall that is on the second floor of the tutorial block at Adjunct Campus Education Department. And that has been there for a number of years. And because of its location, it gets a lot of attention from not just the students, but also the lecturers and everyone else, all the different stakeholders in the building. And every day when they stop and look at those images, a new conversation gets started, and it takes different forms because depending on who is sitting there. So it can become a permanent conversation that is featured in a space that is common to everyone, and they can continue to, and it feeds to new events and new conversations that are taking place within that space. Next slide, please. You can also get your participants, for instance, to create a photo narrative where they use the pictures that they've taken during the process of creating and having these conversations collectively to create what we call a photo narrative, where they'll have a caption there. These can also be taken to the spaces that I've just spoken of, but also within the conversation, the main conversation with your participants, it creates an opportunity of first they have these conversations together while they're creating these photo narratives, but also then when they then start to go public within the space of the research space, where now they are now conversing with the others who are not necessarily the creators of this narrative, but they are having that broader conversation. So there are many ways to extend the conversations, and that on its own is also going public within the space of the research. And that also can be taken to places like such as this kind of platform, or you want to go and present to the bigger powers in institutions if it's a conversation that they need to hear. So it is also a conversation that can be taken to various spaces depending on the need of the people who are in possession of the narratives, the photo narratives and all of that. Next slide, please. Yes. And also you can work with single photographs. This reminds me of the photograph that you have there of a conference presentation that Prof. DeLange and Prof. Kao presented, where similar kind of photographs were amongst some of the presentation that they had there. And it showed in that moment, it showed how really significant and powerful images can be, not only to the people who are presenting the work, but to the people who are absorbing and taking in what it is that they're saying. Through those, we were able to create a very intense conversation as the audience reacted to the photographs. And it took the conversation to maybe a different space than they had planned, but it was an important space. But in that moment also, there was a realization of the power of those photographs and the power of creating different layers of conversations that are needed for particular people to have. And through just one photograph, it can take a different spin, but still feeding back to the core idea of what the photograph intended to say. And there are many understandings from the conversations that will then emerge. especially with this one, because as you can see, it speaks to issues of safety, and it speaks, gender-based violence, and usually within the South African context, because we've had quite a huge outbreak of this kind of I want to call it pandemic in its sense. And it's a conversation that is also has a lot of silences, and these images are able to force us to have these open conversations and kind of block out the silences around these conversations. Next slide, Bernard, please. Okay, now usually, as I think Lisa has just kind of outlined, that the taking of the photographs is instant, and you can have people going out and taking photographs, and then they come back, and then you engage them in the various processes after that. But they also can work with working with, like we said, found or pre-existing visual data, which is pre-existing photographs. In our lives, especially in these days, we create quite a lot of visuals through our cell phones. And sometimes we do take that nostalgic moment where we look back and we have a different view of what is that we're seeing in terms of what we have created over the years of the film. So they're able to have that kind also of impact. So it's not just a fresh photograph sometimes of what you're just taking at that moment. It could be a pre-existing photograph that still has the same powerful, because it has captured that moment in time, and the meaning gets captured, and it gets stored, and it gets moments of interpretation from those who are looking at that. So with the one that you see there, as you said, it's the documentary of Thembinkosi story, which I think it is important for us to really understand that, especially when you're talking about some of our historical events that take place in many of our countries, more specifically here in South Africa, a lot of our stories were not really narrated by the people, the victims themselves. They were being told on how to narrate their story, but through the images and the photos that that emerged from those eras and those incidences, they were able to have their own voice and be able to come to speak to that. I'm gonna slide over because I want to speak to the next one, Bernard. Okay, I think it's the next one after it, but I'm going to just go through this one. No, you can go back, Bernard. Go back again. And back again. Again, thank you, Bernard. Sorry. No. I think it's the one before. I think we skipped another one. One more time. Okay. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, I wanted to just say this point again in terms of, if you go back a little bit, just one, where you were at, Bernard, where we, I think, Lisa, you spoke about a little bit on this, and then I think Lebo also spoke a little bit on that also, of the power of the photographs. And when you're going public, usually when you are the one who is coming with the images and you're coming with the presentation, people think that you're the one who has the voice, the power. But when you have these kinds of visual presentations, the people continue to have a say in what it is that is being. When I say people, I mean the creators of those images. So it is able, through that, you are able to actually use those moments to actually use a lot of our marginalized groups, if to put it as it's stated, where usually we see them as people who don't have a voice, who are not able to articulate very well what it is that they need to say to people, and also don't get a chance to be heard. At the same time, as the slides kind of unpacks for you, it's the children, the women, people in rural spaces where we usually want to interpret for ourselves what it is that they want to say. But through the work they've created through Photovoice, we are able to take a step back and allow them to actually have those powerful moments of conversations through the images. Next slide. Next slide, Bernard. Thank you. So what can we learn? Go back again. Thanks, Bernard. Back again. Okay, so what can we learn from this work? There's quite a lot. And I think as we've been kind of talking to you now, you're already kind of creating in your head, what is it that I'm taking from what is being said to me now? And you're starting to look at it now in the context of what it is that you do. And you are now seeing how it can play itself in the context of the work that you do. But one of the important things that this, as I think I've said this quite a number of times, is, you know, those opportunities of proper engagement, of critical engagement with each other without having someone to dominate with their voices. You know, we go to a lot of these conferences, not that the power of words is still, you know, we're saying that it is no longer important, but sometimes somebody has to kind of, should I say, shut up and let another form of conversation to take place. And when we do that, when we say less and we allow these visual moments to take charge, we are able to really then start to engage in a very deep and critical manner. And this what this method of research actually gives you opportunities to do. I mean, let's just, as you see the example that is there on the bed, you know, when one speaks of the South African history and you're speaking of the 1970s kind of movement, you know, with the Bantu education, there's always that one picture that every time when it comes out, the conversations, no matter how old you are, that conversation always comes back, and it always engages people, and it always brings in new ways and new forms of communicating with each other. The picture of Hector Peterson, I'm sure all of us relate to that picture. It's a picture that kind of sums up what was the experience of that time. And we are able to continue to have those kinds of conversations and engage with each other, and getting big social spaces, I mean, groups of people in that kind of spaces to see this and engage and inform policies and make changes that are necessary, you know, for human beings to really feel safe and heard, and that we are contributing something. So it is that kind of work that is being done, that when it gets public, then it is able to afford us those kinds of opportunities. I would like to stop there, and I think, Astrid, you next.
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to talk briefly about some important ethical considerations in participatory visual research. I won't go into much depth because I think we're all excited to do our own practical exercise, and I think that it might be an idea to look at some of these again in our discussion at the end, and just to see if we can revisit questions of ethics after the exercise. But before we start, I think it's important that we do consider ethics and how this relates to this kind of work. So there are nine important considerations that we'd like you to be aware of. And the one is the question of informed consent, because with a participatory process, people are not always aware in the beginning what they're going to create. So it's not ethical to ask them to sign a release form to sharing a photograph or a video when they haven't even seen it yet themselves. So with this kind of work, it's very important that we do a multi-step process and gain informed consent or assent at the beginning, and then at different stages in the process ask people to revisit that, and especially at the end when they've created the product, like the photo or the drawing or whatever they've created, they need a chance to actually look at it and consider how they want to share that product, and then to sign a release form. The next important consideration is the question of anonymity and confidentiality, and how this interacts with questions of ownership and autonomy in participatory research, because we can't, it's not always appropriate for people to be named, and in many cases research participants might choose to withhold their names or not to be identified. But then the question is, how can you really acknowledge them for the work that they've done as a co-researcher in the project? And how can you also give credit for the autonomy in the project? So these are the kind of questions that we grapple with as researchers in this work. The next point is visual and digital literacy, and the fact that not everyone has the same level of literacy, and we all come from different backgrounds with different education, and we need to be aware of this as researchers when we do this kind of work, that we have different levels and different kinds of literacy. And this relates quite a lot to the method that you might use, and Lisa spoke about this earlier, and the importance of using a method that's accessible. Not always the best idea to go with a very fancy technology or a complicated camera. Rather use something that's a part of people's everyday lives, like an entry-level smartphone, or maybe a form of community art. I know sometimes people might use a beadwork or another form of visual art that's a part of everyday life and something that can sustain beyond the project if people want to build on this work. Another important whole realm of considerations is the question of relationships in research and how we all come from different backgrounds. And in many cases, as researchers, we come in with more education and wealth, and sometimes you're working with people from a much poorer background in resource-poor settings, and we need to be aware of how this influences our relationships and the power dynamics in research, because we don't want to coerce people into taking part or for people to feel obliged to be a part of our project. And we also don't want to encourage tokenistic involvement where people are just there because, for a show or as a form of representation, and we don't actually really take the chance to listen to their voices and for them to really be involved as true participants in the process. So we really need to consider our relationships and our backgrounds and how this influences the way that research is carried out. The sixth important consideration is that of dissemination, and that relates a bit to number one, informed consent and assent, and the fact that people need to have the opportunity to decide what they want to share and how they want to share it. And they must do that through a release form and have the opportunity to revisit that decision at different points in the project. And also whether they want to be a part of the dissemination process and if it's safe for them to do so. And the seventh consideration revolves around research ethics committees and research ethics boards, and how the fact that many of these boards, especially in this kind of research, are governed by biomedical principles, and they're not always used to this kind of research. And so that can cause difficulties, and sometimes the rigid principles that they're used to using in clinical trials aren't always appropriate for this kind of work. And there really is a need for more flexible research ethics and for work where we look at how ethics relates to the actual process and how they play out in specific contexts. So, and there's also a need for researchers with this kind of background to sit on research ethics committees and to help advise them when they judge these kind of projects. Lastly, there's the question of language, and I'm sure many of us are working in multilingual contexts where we come from different backgrounds, and it's important that the co-researcher participants and the researchers are able to understand each other, and that needs to be really considered in the process, and to make sure that the consent forms and assent forms are translated into Indigenous languages so that people fully understand what's going on. And in many cases, you might need to have a translator or to ensure that you have Indigenous people who can speak Indigenous languages on the research team so that people don't feel alienated. Can we look at the next slide, please? So just a few practical issues to consider. Things that you need to apply and when you use this kind of method is the importance of asking permission to take photographs. So if you want to include someone in a photograph that you know, for Photovoice, you need to ask their permission before you do that. And in the next slide, I'll show you there's an example of a kind of form that you might use. Lisa spoke a bit about this, about how you can use photographs in different ways. And you can take a close-up of someone, maybe their hands. I'll show you some examples just now. So you don't always have to have a photo of someone's face to tell a story. You can tell a lot about the situation. You can tell a story without showing somebody's identity. And also sometimes you might take a photograph of something else, a plant or a building, like that photograph of the toilet. That tells, you don't necessarily have to have somebody in the actual picture. And of course, the ownership, we spoke about ownership earlier, and who owns the photographs. And that's important to decide that with participants at the beginning of the project, so there's no confusion or misunderstanding. And always to acknowledge when you didn't take the photo yourself. So if you're going to use it in your research, you need to acknowledge the source of that photo. Next slide, please. So I won't read this all out, but we can share this with you later. This is just an example of the kind of form you could use if you want to ask someone permission to take their photo. Next slide, please. And this is a very interesting example of a visual ethical consent form, because sometimes it's hard to imagine what the process might look like and what it might actually feel like to be a participant in the research. And then you could use something like this visual ethical consent form, where you have photographs of the different stages, and then people can have a better idea of what they're consenting to before they agree whether or not to take part. And then there's one last slide. These are just some examples of photos that people might take which don't show the identity of the person in the photograph, such as the one of the girls, look like school girls walking there, or some photographs of people from behind. There's another one of a photograph at a distance of a funeral, or maybe that's a ceremony, or a close-up of a hand, or another one of the empty hairdressing salon. So these are images that can tell a story without exposing somebody's identity if you're wanting to take an anonymous photo. So thank you very much for your time. And now we're going to break off out into sessions so that we can share the photographs that you've taken and talk about them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What we would like to do, the video doesn't want to come on, but yeah, what we would like to do next is that we break into smaller groups. Our team here is going to assist with the facilitation, and we are going to be breaking into small groups and then hopefully share some of the pictures that you have taken and get a sense of what the process may be like when you are doing a process like that. So it's going to be a bit of, it's also a little bit new for us to do it via Zoom or via kind of the sort of online platform. But I think it's like quite an exciting process to play with and to experience. So we'll have 45 minutes to have this discussion, and then we'll come back and share some of the experiences. So if you could split us up into the breakaway rooms, that would be great.
When you're muted.
Yeah. we'll start the breakout rooms, and we'll be splitting into 3 groups as previously discussed. Just give me a minute. We will start breakout.
3 groups or more groups? Let Professor Bernard clarify.
We're going to break into 3 groups. I think the overall group is a bit smaller, so we'll break into 3 groups and then come back after 45 minutes.
Okay, great. So who is doing it, Mudita? Navin?
Sir, I am doing that.
Okay, fine. Till the time they are doing that, I had a query is it necessary to use photos only, or can hand-drawn depictions or abstract animations could also be used?
I answer, Lebo?
Yes, go ahead, Bernard.
Okay.
I didn't quite hear the question.
Yeah, so the question was whether other images can also be used. So does it need to be a photo? So there are a number of different visual processes where people can use drawings. They can, like in one process that we were involved with, they kind of used images from the internet. The one issue with using not your own image, particularly when you want to publish it, is copyright. So you just need to be careful about whether images that you use are copyrighted, that they belong to somebody else, and that technically you would need to get permission to it if you use it in any other public way. But certainly you can use collages, you can cut pictures out of newspapers and put those together. And it's really the process of developing an image and the discussion around the image that is really the process. I think in the image making, we often take one step back and we kind of it accesses a whole lot of ways of thinking that are more complex than just talking. And I think that's kind of what the methodology really manages to access. Not sure whether the others would like to add to that.
I think you covered it. So it is the process of creating the image that is important. The other kinds of visuals involved a different kind of process, similar but different at the same time. So you have to be deliberate in choosing what visual method you are using in that particular case.
So there's a question about how does the research question for visual methods differ from that we frame for the traditional qualitative research? Like, for instance, do we explore the perceptions in traditional methods?
And I have to declare here that I don't like the question, the perceptions of, because I never know what that means. But okay, let's say we're exploring the perceptions of, and I think photographs or drawings can communicate those perceptions in deeper and different ways as the interview or a questionnaire, for example. So you can ask the same question, but you could then use a particular prompt to get to those perceptions through visual methods. So you can have the same questions, but the methodology and then the prompt would be different.
Hello. We are ready. We are ready, sir. We are ready. Sessions are ready.
Okay.
Shall we start? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
please. That would be great. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah.
Subodh sir.
Yes, sir. It's 10, 11, 11, and this group.
Subodh sir.
Hello.
think the sessions will finish in about 40 seconds.
Yes. We are in the big room now.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back.
I think the breakout rooms were the very exciting. I mean, nobody wanted the breakout rooms to end. Such lovely pictures being shared and the discussion that was happening.
That's great. That sounds very good. What we wanted to do in this last session is kind of very...
Sir, excuse me. Before we start, I
Yes,
just want everyone to turn on their camera so that we can have a colorful screenshot.
Yes, please. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Please, everyone, turn on your front cam. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you.
That looks amazing. So thank you very much. What we wanted to do now is to get a little bit of feedback from each of the rooms, and kind of just very briefly about what maybe some really some important insights about leadership. But I think because we are really wanting to focus on the methodology, on kind of understanding how Photovoice works, maybe if there are some reflections in particular of how you found the process of that meaning making from the image. So can we ask the group one to go first? Is there anybody to give feedback?
So,
Is group one,
myself,
Bennett?
myself, Dr. Shivapriya, sir. So I have volunteered myself to brief in the breakout session that we had. So coming to the leadership qualities, so we have discussed that leadership, the leader should stand in front and he should take the lead, and he should have the courage to inspire the community or community in terms of anything, and he should have the knowledge and skill, and the leader should be from the community itself, and he should have the skills to gather the people, and the gathering should be a collective gathering, and it should also be secular, and the leadership is all about doing small things in a right way, and the leader should also go into the community. He should gather problems, and as public health professionals we should also contribute to address the issues in the community, and the leader should also be resilient to get all beaten up from the community. So, and the ethical issues should be coming to the pictures. The ethical issues should be addressed in terms of the angle of the pictures, and coming to the present perspectives. The COVID norm should be followed whenever we are planning for a gathering, and we should be careful enough to give credits to the pictures. That's it, sir.
Thank you for that. Does any reflections on the process, like any reflections on the experience of using the photos to have a discussion?
I think I have projected my research study regarding the drawings in our breakout session, sir. So I didn't know the actual methodology that we have discussed previously. Like we should do it in a layer-wise manner, in which we have done it very crudely. Now, after listening to the session, I got to know that we did it very crudely, and that's it, sir.
Yeah.
I don't have anything much to say.
No,
Someone
thanks.
from
That's
our
great.
breakout session can add.
No, that's great. I mean, we can discuss it a bit further with everyone together.
My
Abhishek, did you
reflection,
want to?
yeah, my reflection of the breakout session is people may seem very naive about the given prompt, but it's not like that. If you ask them and if you trust them to come up with something, they eventually will do. To be very honest, I had huge apprehension if all of us would turn up with the pictures that you had asked us for. And to my surprise, almost, I think 6 or 7 pictures were shared in the group, and the kind of discussion that happened. So one is you need to trust people, and you need to give them their time to open up. Maybe there might be some hesitancy initially, but then after some time, the way in which people open up and express their own thoughts regarding what leadership to them means or looks like, it helps us understand a deeper meaning to what that particular group or what that community feels regarding the prompt that we had given. And to me, that was very insightful. With some when we allow them some time and when we allow the discussion to free flow, the deeper meaning that it helps us to understand.
Thanks, Abhishek. Maybe let's go to group 2. Is there somebody from group 2 from the breakout room group 2? Is there somebody giving feedback?
Was it your group, Mudita? No.
So I was in group 3.
I think you were in group 2 actually.
Yeah.
Because I was in group 3. Yeah. I think that was your group.
So sorry, I might have got a little confused. Yeah, so in group 2, I had a good learning for the fact that I understood that there are different. At the end of the breakout session, I was learning that there are different methods and when to use those different methods. And even if you're unable to extract or elicitate what we want to know from the participants, we can still evoke a discussion after the vision method has been conducted. Say whatever the participatory vision method may be, even after taking the photographs or even after receiving those written handmade drawings, to elicit a specific point or to can use the method along with this method as well, in case we do not end up receiving what we wanted to find out through that particular participatory method. So that is something that I learned. And again, I would like to second the opinion that Dr. Abhishek sir just explained. Even that was a learning for me too in session 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments from the rest of the group on that? Maybe we can go to group 3. Pratik Ranjan, I think you were going to give feedback.
Sir,
Go for it.
I learned a great from this workshop /CME. So in terms of leadership, like we talked about leadership. So we learned, like from my perspective, I was thinking that leadership is when we are taking an initiative or we're doing something that a lot of people are not doing. That is a very good sign of leadership. And from other perspective, I saw that like also discussed earlier in other session, that if you're going to a community, you are looking for the problem, and you are cooperating or encouraging someone, giving support, that is a good sign of leadership. And in terms of the visual method of research, like from our group breakout session, there was an example of an empty chair. So we can see that the person is trying to communicate that there is a lack of leadership there, or people are lacking access to something because there is no one to provide them, maybe healthcare or some other facility. So that image actually got stuck in my mind. So I was able to get what the person was trying to communicate just looking at the picture. And maybe one or two line if they are prompting, then that is more than sufficient to get the image. And like Sir talked about that there was this photo gallery or something in China that even illiterate people were able to communicate very effectively sophisticated messages that sometimes like even whoever is very eloquent or good words is not able to communicate. So that was one finding that I found very fascinating. It is a very good medium to actually overcome the language barrier or maybe some level of intellectuality that we associated with research could be overcome. So that is what I found. Very helpful, very good lesson that I.
Thank you very much for that feedback. Are there any comments from any of the other groups or reflections on what has been shared?
Hello, my name is Dr. Shilpa, and I would just like to share a point, if that's okay. Yeah, actually, I would like to thank the organizers. Actually, the exercise was very interesting. I think it kind of summed up everything in a nutshell. The whole session made sense after we all presented our pictures, and in fact, that the word leadership in your context made so much of sense because for everyone.
Breaking up a little bit.
Am I the only one who is not able to hear anything?
Also can't hear anything. I think she's been struggling to.
Perhaps we could come back to her when she comes back.
When she comes back. Other comments? Anyone else?
I would like to add 2 more points for the learning points that I have told earlier. So this kind of participatory methods can be very much useful for good, impactful, engaging learning for students or any other groups. And also the sensitive issues can be dealt well. And I also agree with Nayak, Dr. Nayak. He told that it can also be applied for illiterate persons, and also a diversified groups can also be engaged in these kind of research methods. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So the one point that came up in our group where we discussed the empty chair is that kind of what is quite nice about this methodology is that you can have multiple meanings of the same image. So the one person may say the chair is empty because the leader is walking around and is engaging with everyone outside of the clinic, where the empty chair can become a really positive image. Or the empty chair can be interpreted, oh, there's nobody sitting there, there's a lack of resource. So the meaning making, the kind of two different people look at the same image and make very different meaning of that, and both meanings can be true. So, and that's kind of one of the really wonderful thing that often in groups, people then tend to kind of move towards a consensus as if there's only one thing that is true about that particular issue that you're exploring. But particularly with the images, it allows you to have multiple interpretations of that because the image is there and you are talking to the image. So there's multiple understandings that often are present in communities and in groups kind of really can surface.
Hi. Actually, I'm from group 2. There was a network issue in between. What I learned from them, the leadership starts at the home level. The leadership is not like a person who is leading everyone. It starts all at the ground level. As my other sir said in the group, even the woman, I posted one pic of woman who is working hard for her family, and I thought of showing the gender inequality in that picture. But what I understood, the leadership starts from home. She leading her family, leading a child, she cooks. So leadership is everything. What I learned from that. Leadership is not the person is standing in front and leading everything. For me, the leadership exists everywhere. There should be channelized. It should be channelized. That's it. So, and I learned how to present, how to prompt into that picture, how to think about what is the existing problems. Thanks for the ma'am who has given a valuable points to me.
Thank you very much for that comment. That's really helpful. We're running out of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left. And from our side, I think it's been quite interesting to try and do a workshop like this on a platform like this, and kind of to trust the technology to produce, well, or maybe not to produce, but also I think that is also the reality when we go into the communities, that we kind of often find situations that are not completely ideal. And I think this kind of part of the process is exactly what was said earlier, that we need to trust the process, we need to trust the people, we need to trust the process, and that is actually where the meaning making is. So what Abhishek was saying earlier about, you get anxious about it. I think there has been some anxiety on our part as well around this, but it is actually when you trust the process and trust the people that it's incredible what can come out of that. So from our side, Lebo, I'm not sure whether you've got something to add to that, or any of the others.
Yeah, just a quick point with, I think Abhishek asked later, how do we catalyze change in communities? And with 1 minute left, I'll try my best. So usually what we do in group settings is we put, as you saw earlier, we put the photographs into exhibitions, or we use them individually to facilitate community dialogue. And it is from community dialogue where you invite communities to identify solutions to the problem that you had investigated. And you might not effect the change, but you begin the process of identifying possible strategies for change. And we can talk online further if you like on that issue. But also from my side, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the process today. Nerve-wracking, but enjoyable.
Thanks. Lungi or Lisa or Astrid, or Andrew, any comments?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been quite interesting. I've never used this platform before, so I think that's where the anxiety was coming from, not quite knowing. But I really, really enjoyed. I was in group 1. I loved the engagement and the insightfulness, and also just the willingness to on something new. And I really enjoyed having that, and you can feel, when you're engaging people, you can tell that they are really in the moment of engagement, and that was really nice to experience. Thank you for that.
I think the process was interesting. I think that the platform makes it quite challenging to interact. And for a variety of reasons, people found it difficult to engage. And I don't know, sometimes we feel there's a right or a wrong, whereas the nice thing about the pictures is that you're just talking about what you see, and then ideas sort of snowball. One person mentions this, you see, oh, I didn't see that in the picture, and then you can develop that idea. So I think it's a way of sort of generating new ways of looking at maybe an old issue, a woman doing domestic work. That can just be an old image of women just do domestic work, or it can be an issue around women actually showing quite a lot of leadership in leadership in their homes, and how do we acknowledge that, and how do we build on that? And so it allows you to kind of, see with new lenses in a sense, and I think that's helpful.
Lisa or Astrid?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for everyone for participating. It's always, it can be challenging with doing this online. It was new for me today, and I think it's still worthwhile, and we have to find ways of doing, working in these conditions, and yeah, it's useful, and I think that we can all learn, and thank you for having the courage to try and to participate. Thank you.
Lisa, do you want to have a quick say?
I don't really have anything to add, except thanks to everybody for your enthusiasm and willingness to participate.
Yeah, so thank you from my side as well. It's been really amazing. So it really is exciting what one can do. I mean, out of kind of the some ideas of wanting to work together to have a workshop with this size of group, and just trying it out is really, really incredible. So, and I'm really glad that it has been useful for you as well, from a lot of the comments that you've made. And as Lebo was saying, kind of it becomes even more meaningful if there's ongoing dialogue. So the once off is interesting and kind of often stimulates quite a lot of thought and ideas, but as one practices it, and also as there's more dialogue, as there's more engagement with a group of people that's interested in it, it really deepens it and and it really sharpens our tools. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to share this with you all the way here from South Africa, with you in India. This is really, it's really been a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bernard, Professor Lebo, and the entire team. And on behalf of our team, we can only say that, like, I like to quote Professor Subodh here. So he always says that we'll remember COVID has taken away a lot from us, but then it has also given many things to us. And this is the power of information technology and how we can use it. I think that today's workshop is the best example of that. Your team sitting in South Africa, and we are able to participate and learn from you guys from here. I mean, there cannot be a more brilliant example of what COVID has given to us. And had it not been for COVID, I don't know how this workshop would have been possible, because we would have never thought that we can host it on a platform like WebEx or through virtually. Many times, like even when we think at our own end, when we think of using participatory methods, somehow we have this mental barrier that it has to happen in the field, wherein we are able to actually engage with the stakeholders. That could be more powerful, but then even this is not any less powerful. So thank you. And to me, it has just stimulated a process, how we can use some of these visual methods. And I think they are very powerful. And like Dr. Pratik was saying, the fact that we'll be able to use them with the most vulnerable groups, the most the groups that are not at all empowered or minimally empowered. And that is the beauty of this visual method that makes it so powerful. And we'll keep you updated. I think this cohort will keep you updated on how we use and apply these methods, and we bank upon you, and we'll keep coming back to you whenever we get stuck anywhere regarding how to proceed whenever we are using these methods in our own fields here. So thank you, Professor Lebo, Professor Bernard, and everybody in the team. We are truly obliged and express our heartfelt gratitude to the entire team.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been great. It's amazing. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.